All right, guys, we're going to finish Romans chapter 9 today, just the last paragraph here. And you're going to notice something as we continue to move through Romans. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 overlap a lot. I would say especially certain themes in chapter 9 and chapter 11 overlap. And chapter 10 kind of covers both territories. It's an interesting section in the book of Romans, in the Bible really as a whole. And there's a lot that you can learn from it, and I've been kind of teaching it pastorally, trying to make sure that we have direct application in our lives, but there's so much doctrine here too, just really good doctrine. Anyhow, let's look at verse 30 through 33. This will finish out chapter 9, okay? What shall we say then? The Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it, that is, a righteousness that is by faith. But that Israel, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness, did not succeed in reaching that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. Okay? He's still continuing to talk about this Jew and Gentile phenomenon of God's kingdom, that up until the New Testament, God's kingdom was Israel, period. Really no question about it. And at least in the minds of everybody who lived more or less, except there's these random bits of prophecy here and there that point to Gentile faith, that the Gentiles are going to come to Christ. And if you remember, there's these little details mixed in, even back in the book of Matthew, of the genealogy of Jesus, that includes just outright Gentiles and people far from God. There's Rahab, who's from Jericho, who's like the first enemy Israel has in their land. And she's part of the lineage of Jesus. And of course, there's Ruth. And there's just some... Once you understand that God's kingdom is intended to go to the whole world, you can start connecting these dots and really make a lot of sense out of it. But if you didn't have that understanding, you would see those little dots, people like Ruth and stuff like that. You would see them as this kind of outliers. Well, they're minor exceptions, and we just kind of move past them. And then when you hit the New Testament, you realize, actually, those are precursors pointing to a much bigger thing. They weren't exceptions. They were actually like Old Testament foreshadowing of what God's kingdom is really all about. Just interesting little way of interpreting things, that you wouldn't interpret it that way unless you accepted Jesus. And Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to continue living in your Old Testament lifestyle, your Old Testament patterns, your Old Testament beliefs, and you're not going to accept any of the stuff Jesus said. And this whole new movement of the Gentiles, you're going to be like, whatever, that's all started from this Jesus guy, and we reject Jesus. But if you accept Jesus, it all just completely reconfigures how you interpret the Old Testament. And that makes all the difference. It's really remarkable. Usually you would think of things as however the book starts off, the way it begins, it will determine its end. But with Jesus, the way it ends with Jesus determines what the beginning was really all about. And if you really think about it, go back to your Genesis, the real beginning. Those first 11 chapters of Genesis weren't about Israel. They were about the world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, all of it. Adam and Eve weren't Jewish. They were everybody. Everybody stemmed from them. Noah was not Jewish. Everybody stemmed from him. The Tower of Babel scattered all across the face of the earth, right? It's not until God chooses Abraham and calls Abraham out that it starts to zero in just on these chosen people. So it makes sense that if God is the God of the universe, he's not the God of Jews only, but Gentiles also. He is the God of everyone. It makes sense that his son would come to save the world, not just Israel. Okay, but it wouldn't make sense if you're Israel living in this time. The majority of them rejected Christ, of course. Obviously, some did. Paul accepted him. The disciples accepted him. A lot of them did, but it was a minority. Okay, What shall we say then? Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it. They didn't pursue righteousness, that is a righteousness that is by faith. They've attained righteousness by faith. They didn't pursue righteousness by Old Testament law. They didn't have Old Testament law. To the degree that any Gentiles even knew about it, it was that Jewish religion thing that we aren't even allowed in, even if we want to be, or it's very hard. Gentiles were allowed to convert. We already mentioned Rahab and Ruth, of course, but it wasn't easy. And the Jews didn't really make any attempt to convert Gentiles because that wasn't what it was all about, right? They were a separate nation. They were God's people, and everyone else is other people. They're clean and there's unclean. So the Gentiles, just globally speaking, were not pursuing Old Testament law definitions of righteousness. They weren't. They didn't have access to it. They didn't know about it, and it just wasn't a thing, by and large. Okay? But yet they attained a righteousness that is by faith. Meanwhile, verse 31, but Israel, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness, meaning Old Testament law, did not succeed in reaching that law. Okay? Or another translation, Israel, who pursued a law of righteousness, or a law that would lead to righteousness. Different ways of translating that. Either way, they're pursuing Old Testament law, which describes how to be right with God by Old Testament standards, all the sacrifices, the priest system, the Levitical system, the do this, don't do that, the Ten Commandments, all that stuff. Okay, Israel was pursuing that. Man, they were on it. They had periods of time where they disobeyed it outright, but as a nation, as a people, they cared about their temple. They did their stuff. They believed Jerusalem was like God's chosen city, and the land of Israel was God's land, and that they had all this stuff. They were pursuing a law of righteousness. Okay? But whose righteousness were they pursuing? We're going to pick this up again in chapter 10 and 11, but it's foreshadowed in chapter 9, and we'll hit it right here. Whose righteousness is it? That's the core question. Who's righteous? Is it God who is righteous, or is it Israel who is righteous? All right? We need God's righteousness. Okay? They did not succeed in reaching that law. Verse 31. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were by works. They pursued God's righteousness as though it could be theirs, as though they could earn their way in. And this is a big problem. This has been a problem for religious sorts of people forever, that they can somehow earn it and work their way up to God and make God happy by the things they do. And a lot of people say this. All kinds of people say it. Well, I'm just trying to be a good person. All religions are the same. They really just want to make us into better people. We're too selfish and we need to be selfless and whatever. All these things, hey, whatever. If you look at Christianity on a certain level, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. We're kind of all the same. All religions are teaching basic, same kinds of stuff on one level. But that level misses Jesus. It misses the core element of who we are and where we came from and who is God and everything else. Israel is pursuing a righteousness that's based on law. And if it's based on law, then it's based on you obeying the law and doing it. Right? If you live in a law society, you obey the law. That's what you do. How do you make God happy, or how do you make somebody happy? Well, by obeying the law. All right? Israel believed that their land, their particular space that they took up, was going to be linked to their obedience to God, that God gave them that land, promised them that land, said this land is yours, and when you get there, you're going to obey these laws. And so if they ever get kicked out, which they do, it's going to be a direct result because they disobeyed those laws. And it's all true. That happened. It happened literally. God said it would happen, and then it did happen because they disobeyed God's laws. But even when they get their way back, in the time of Daniel and Nehemiah and Ezra and those guys, Zechariah, Haggai, they get their way back to the land. It's still not perfect, and they're conquered not long later by the Persians and the Greeks, and the Romans rule them over. And it's not really their land, and it's not perfect, and they build their temple, but half of them are crying when they build it because they're like, this isn't that special. And read Ezra and Haggai and Zechariah, and you'll see that in Malachi. So anyhow, They are pursuing this based on their own merit. Can I obey God enough to make him happy? And they believed they could, and they were wrong. The Gentiles, can I obey God enough to make him happy? Man, Gentile religions were all over the map. They had hundreds of them. They had all those read your old Roman mythology and your Jupiter and your Greek, I called him Zeus and all this other stuff. They had all kinds of weird stuff. And they weren't pursuing God's law at all. I mean, they were way, way out of line, worshiping all kinds of gods and stuff and making goofy sacrifices. And remember, Paul goes to Athens and they have statues of all kinds of gods that they're all worshiping. And he says, I see that you're very religious in all respects. Yeah, all wrong respects, right? They don't know Jesus. So they're not pursuing they're not pursuing the righteousness of God based on law, because they're not obeying any parts of the law. They don't even know about it, okay? So when they come to faith, it's because they came to faith. It's not because they just started obeying a bunch of rules. It's because they recognized, hey, Jesus is the answer to all this stuff. I don't need other gods. I got Jesus. I don't need to make sacrifices to these gods. I don't need to go to the temple prostitutes and all this crazy stuff that they did. None of that works. That's all wrong. That's human religion, trying to build up a human kingdom, a human sort of thing. And I don't need that. That's not right. I'm not doing it. I got Jesus now. And so the Gentiles recognized it was by faith. It wasn't by what they could do. It was by what Jesus did. The Jews, however, the ones who rejected Jesus, rejected him because they didn't accept that. They wanted control. This is where it comes down to you and I. We always kind of want to be in control of things, don't we? And Christianity is a religion in which you are not in control of your salvation. In every other religion that I've ever heard of, you are in control. You do it, and if you do it right, you're okay. Allah will be pleased with you. Whoever runs Nirvana, if you're a Buddhist, will be pleased with you, or Hinduism or whatever. Do all these things. Judaism, obey and honor God, and he'll give you your land. Okay? You're in control. Christianity says, sorry, you are not in control. Jesus is in control. Stop putting your faith in yourself. Stop putting your faith in your ability to do everything right. Stop it altogether and let Christ's righteousness come through you. It's a completely different thing. And so a lot of people reject it because they want to be in control. They want to be in control of their own destiny. They want you want to have some kind of influence over it. And so all of early church debates were always about this. Well, is there something we can do to kind of seal the deal here? Is there some down payment we could put on it? And they're read Galatians, talking about if we get circumcised, that's something we can do, and that'll make God happy, and that'll kind of seal the deal. It'll make sure that what we're doing is right. And the Bible says, no, you live by faith. The righteous one will live by faith. Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews, that's the core verse. The righteous one will live by faith, okay, not by works. It's remarkable. You are not in control. You are not, it's God who is in control, and you are living by faith that he is in control, okay? They did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were based on works, verse 32. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone. The stumbling stone is your own self-confidence. As is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Whoever believes in him, it's Jesus. It says it's a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, but then it calls it a him. It's not talking about a rock. It's talking about Jesus. Will not be put to shame. All right, put your faith in him. If you don't put your faith in him, you're going to trip over him. You're going to stumble over him. You're going to reject him. You're going to be like, I don't like this guy. I would rather go on my own way. He says, nope, put your trust in him. Live by faith and not by works and not by sight. All right, praise the Lord. I'll catch up with this some more tomorrow. We'll move into chapter 10. God bless.